Hi everyone, it's Joe Veneri, the host of Fitt Insider, the show where I talk with the entrepreneurs, executives, and investors who are redefining the business of fitness and wellness. Today I'm joined by Martin Adler, CEO of Brooklyn Boulders, operators of urban climbing, fitness, and community centers. In this episode, we discuss the growing business of rock climbing, leveraging technology to enhance the climbing experience, and falling in love with the joy of movement. Before today's episode, I wanted to share some updates to the Fitt Insider platform. As you might know, in addition to this podcast, we send a weekly newsletter to help operators stay informed and make better decisions. We also launched an industry-specific jobs board filled with hundreds of openings at top companies, and we're actively investing in early-stage health and fitness startups. To see what's new or to get in touch, visit insider.fit.co. Hi, Martin. Welcome to Fitt Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to today's conversation. And just to kick things off, can you introduce yourself and tell us about Brooklyn Boulders?
Yeah, my name is Martin Adler. I'm the CEO of Brooklyn Boulders. The most on-the-nose explanation is we operate rock climbing gyms. They're very differentiated, though. I like to think they're imbued with the spirit of Brooklyn. They are hyper-urban, so we're in New York, Boston, Chicago, DC. And so they're very young. They have an urban sensibility, a lot of focus on art, community, innovation. So you'll see things like murals and art installations. We've had concerts, done TEDx talks. And a lot of focus on being a meeting place for the community, both for our members and then other people in the hyper local environment. Our newest gyms have fitness offerings, more general fitness offerings that would rival, say, like the Equinoxes of the Lifetimes, inclusive of things like saunas. But very much we're from historically and still to this day focused on rock climbing and birthing the next generation of climbers. So making climbing accessible to people who live in cities who may not have grown up with a lot of exposure to the outdoors, and then also helping people bridge from falling in love with the sport in the gym to getting outside and all the benefits mentally and physically of being outdoors.
Yeah, it's a super cool concept. And, you know, I think as it relates to making it accessible, kind of making it cool and fun and attracting an audience beyond maybe that traditional climber, Brooklyn Boulders springs to mind. And that's why I want to have this conversation today. And I think maybe framing that up for listeners who might be, you know, I think of folks that I typically talk to on the show and then just generally interact with across the industry, you know, more fitness and boutique fitness operator or fitness tech. But, you know, we're doing our best, right, to kind of loop the outdoor and endurance tech industry into that conversation. Can you give us a sense of like how big that market or audience is, whether that's, you know, kind of rooting that in how many folks come through the gyms or just how large you can kind of quantify the audience and market in general?
Yeah, okay, I'll use very round numbers. One thing, we're not yet at the level where we get coverage from like the Forrester or the Gartners of the world, soon to be. So you see estimates of climbers in the US somewhere between 5 and 10 million annually. We've exposed over 1 million people to the sport of climbing just through our own organization, which I'm proud of. And that's really a legacy of others as well. The industry is in the neighborhood of between 700 million and $1 billion industry in the US. I think it's got tremendous room to grow. It's had roughly 7% year over growth. I think it's now almost 10 years that we've seen that growth pattern. Obviously, COVID put a near-term dent in that, but we've really bounced back tremendously from COVID. And the way I would frame it, you know, I remember having early exposure to yoga in LA in maybe 2003 or something like that. And at the time, it was somewhat esoteric, and it was like there were early adopters, and now it's in every strip mall in the country. And in climbing, has some structural challenges there, the height of the facility walls and the size of facilities. But actually, there's a lot of technology innovation that's making it more accessible and available. The history and legacy of our organization, Brooklyn Boulders, was to bring the concept of a rock climbing gym into the city. They used to be on the exurbs or more rural, especially where land and building environments were cheap. And that meant that the people who were exposed to climbing often were close to outdoor areas, which is only a minority of the population, or were highly motivated to find these gyms off the beaten path. And we led the charge, and others have also seen that there's good business here to bring rock climbing into the city where there's a lot of young professionals. And so I see us very much tracking along the lines of, let's say, a yoga where initially there were early adopters and it was sort of a foreign concept, and now it's in the general repertoire of American fitness. And we're very much along that path. We've been on that path for quite some time, and all signs, indications are that we continue there and further accelerating.
Yeah, it's awesome. One, just getting folks exposure, and two, if it does happen to be an on-ramp right into the outdoors and climbing and hiking in general, all the better, right? But even the idea of getting active and exposure to rock climbing, we've seen it. I've seen it in cities like New York, but I've also seen it. We're based in Pittsburgh, and there's a few kind of climbing gyms here, and folks, they kind of get that taste and they really enjoy it. So it's awesome to see that flip of the switch happen. With that, thinking about the number, obviously you want to grow participation and access to climbing and give people, the chance and opportunity to try it out and maybe do it outdoors. And you have to walk that line, right, between catering to that core climber who comes to the gym for a very specific thing, and also this kind of social or recreational consumer who might be there for their first time. How does the demographic break out across those different cohorts, and how do you balance that, right, with the different people coming through the doors?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. The way I would think about it is people have to start somewhere. So at any given time, there's more people, because the sport is growing, entering the sport. And so, for example, we just opened a gym in DC, explosive initial growth. I'm just over the moon about it. The team there did a fantastic job. Most of the people coming in there have never climbed before. And so we're exposing an entire city, because it's the first in the metro area in DC. We're exposing a whole city to the sport of climbing. And so there's some variability by location, but the general premise is people have to begin where they are. They often come in flirting with the concept of it. Maybe they're brought in by a friend. We have what we consider bucket listers. Some people come and they just want to try it once. Many of those people try it, love it, and get hooked, and it becomes a central pillar in their life. In the sport, historically and to this day, and Kimberly talked about this a little bit from Kaya, was really about mentorship. So I learned to climb outside. I had the good fortune of meeting some people who were much further along the path than I, and were willing to invest their time and energy in helping to, in a very literal sense, teach me the ropes. Where we need to move in the sport is to maintain that same ethos, where the people who have progressed further down the path help bring others along through the spirit of friendship and community. And also we need to bring infrastructure to bear to help that, because there's just frankly more people coming into the sport than can be, let's say, like one-on-one mentored. And there's a real role for technology to mediate there. And we're very sensitive to, you could think of like the bell curve of ability, where we have a small portion of people within our gyms who are climbing at the hyper elite level. A lot of people who you could think of as sort of beginner, intermediate, especially on that late beginner to intermediate path. And then always a portion of people coming in who have had no exposure to climbing, or let's say maybe they're in their first month of membership and they're just getting used to it. And the sport itself, because of the innovation of bouldering, which is where the roots are not as long, they're not as tall. You're not wearing a rope or a harness, so you don't need someone to belay you. And you're falling onto very thick gymnastic crash pads or mats. They're like 16 inches thick, and you can fall pretty comfortably from up to, say, 15 feet. That's more accessible to people. Every kid climbed on a jungle gym, and people just understand the general premise of trying to do something that's difficult. And at a certain point, you just can't proceed and you fall. And, that's fun. And then they rest and recover and try again. So I think the sport itself, because of the advent of bouldering, more than half of the gyms being built now are specific to bouldering, and something like 85% of the gyms being built now are in metro areas as opposed to semi-rural. We're bringing the most palatable form of climbing to more people. And that's like a innovation side. There's a technology component to that. And then there's the cultural ethos of it being a communal environment where people are really supported. And one thing that I love about climbing, and this is not present in many sports when you really get into it, is you're working on what we call projects, a climb you believe you could achieve with multiple attempts, but you haven't yet achieved. And that's for you, that's personal. But people around you are very excited to see that you're achieving your goal, but your lack of ability to achieve it doesn't diminish anyone else. So it's not like if you're on lacrosse team and you miss a pass and then you shoot and miss the goal, you've kind of in a sense let your team down. And the corollary, the flip of that is if you get the goal, your team's excited. But this is a world where you're doing things purely for your own enjoyment, for the joy of movement or to achieve a personal goal, to try really hard. And there's a self-improvement lens there generally. And when you succeed, people are very excited for you. They're also very excited, even if you don't succeed, to see you putting in effort. So effort and sort of will is very valued in the culture of the sport. And so you create this environment where there's almost no negative. There's no negative repercussion to failure. It's highly embracing of failure, but there's a lot of positive social reinforcement of success, of trying hard, and of supporting other people. And when I think about the way, if you could just make a broad brush and improve culture and society, it would be pretty hard to argue against those being central tenets that you'd want to increase, all things being equal. And so we're very just fortunate that that's been the history of climbing. And it's for us as operators of these businesses to be stewards of that culture going forward. So it doesn't become transactional or isolating. And there's many ways, we don't want it to turn into like being in a big box gym where you put your headphones on, you don't talk to anyone. And there's something really special there. We need to preserve that and further that.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And I think there's this kind of just natural in going and experience climbing indoors or outdoors. It's very, kind of authentic in the way that comes about, right? The mentorship, the encouragement, the socializing, community. But the other side of that is also just the obvious like health and fitness benefits, right? At Brooklyn Boulders, it ties in with the kind of fitness center, wellness center vibes that you do have through like sauna and things like that. But in the broader kind of culture, is it just explicitly stated that like, hey, this is really good for us and we're getting healthier as a way of within that lifestyle, like spending time in the outdoors? Or I know at the upper levels of climbing, right, they're training and conditioning like any elite athlete would, but just in like the casual climber. And the kind of rationale behind asking that question is, to your point around, hey, we would all be much better off with like a lot of these attributes just in society. But the thought that like climbing and being outdoors and participating in outdoor activities as a means of living a healthier lifestyle and also making that more accessible and making movement part of your life in these new and fun ways that is not purely based on, hey, did I bench press more today? Did I do better in this class? Is that something that you all try to convey or even push? Or is it more, hey, we're going to do our job to encourage people to come and participate and experience this? And that's a natural byproduct of it. How do you think about that?
Oh, man. Okay. So I think just by the way you asked the question, I'm already preaching to the converted. Yes, it's so deep into all of our decision-making because when you think of like whether it's survivor bias or just the way these companies are structured, they're run, operated all the way at every level by people that love climbing. And so what climbing has done for you, it's kind of like a lens where you can get almost anything out of it, like running. So there's people who run and they want to push themselves to the absolute limit. They find that cathartic. There's people who just want to enjoy a jog on a beautiful day. There's people that are in it for the social or in it to be outside. And I would say climbing has sort of that and more. And so there are people who come in, I have a note next to my desk, like depending on how you ask the question, 70 to 85% of people coming in new to the sport are saying they're looking for a creative way to get fit. So they're like, I was thinking about joining a gym and this seems fun. That is a different argument than saying you're going to fall in love with the joy of movement, or you are going to over time, slowly but surely recognize that your body, your ability to move is in itself very gratifying. And there's so many messages in our culture that are like self-flagellating, like I need to lose weight, or I ate this thing last night, so I got to burn it off, or, pushing for aesthetic goals. And they're kind of coming from a sense at a certain level, and I'm included in this, I think many are, of like lack of I want to look a certain way, or I'm upset with myself because I did something historically, maybe eating or not exercising, not taking care of yourself. It's different than saying, I have this body for this extent that I'm alive. I'm going to continue to move around in this body. And it's an absolutely joyful vessel. And I can tap into that joy. And so I think that people, whether they come in looking for that or they find that over time, that happens. It's a pathway that you can sort of track, and we see it in our data depending on how we ask the question. And then coming with that is this whole separate lens, which is time spent outside with friends. And then that correlates with pro-environmental behaviors like wanting to, conserve public lands, or you even just do more recycling. But you don't have to put those right on the front, on the nose, and say you have to believe these things to come in here and enjoy this activity. If someone wants to come in because they think it might be fun, or they want to lose weight, or they saw it on TV and they've always wanted to try it, or even if they want to come in specifically for an aesthetic benefit, they want to look like a climber. That's a body type that I think is well received in culture today. Over time, you'll probably get the thing you were first looking for, but it will unlock these other deeper layers of meaning. And I think that is true of many activities that people can make pillars of their lives. And running is one. For me, surfing is one, where it's not even necessarily the thing that you went looking for, but it reveals itself like layers of an onion. And there's no end to the depth through which you can pursue and develop, and the types of friendships you can make and experiences you can have.
Yeah, I think that was really well said. The falling in love with the joy movement. And I think the more avenues and opportunities we can give folks to experience that, and they can continue to follow that path to whatever extent that they want, I think is really powerful. So I think, super important, and glad that we touched on that. Obviously, and maybe changing gears a little bit, one of the things that we wanted to touch on was, and you mentioned this a little bit, with just kind of COVID creating a hurdle, like so many other businesses, for indoor rock climbing, but also at the same time, Brooklyn Boulders being able to open some new facilities during this time. Kind of what was the impact? How did that, if it did, change things? And now, what does the outlook appear to be as we hopefully turn the corner here?
Well, as you can imagine, I mean, we were hit. All operators of climbing gyms were hit about as hard as you can be hit, because we could not be open. And it's not like a delivery where I can, ship you through e-commerce, or, you can get DoorDash delivering climbing to you. Not currently in any respect. So we went from a firm shutdown. Many of our members stayed with us and continued to pay their dues and accrue future credits. And that really helped us survive that. So I have to express my gratitude there. And I think all of our team feels that way. Coming out of COVID, or actually we're in a sense not out of COVID, but coming out of the real depths of COVID, we launched one gym in Chicago in September of 2020. That was a very challenging time to launch a gym. We have a fantastic manager there. And so I think we made that as successful as it could be during COVID. We, September of this year, 2021, launched our first gym in the DC area. And that was the most successful launch we've ever had by something like 30%. We've got one of our gyms in Chicago now has more members than it did prior to COVID, and others are in this, say, 70 to 90+% of where they were prior. So we see a number of things. One is we've exposed a record number for our organization, I think it's true for many, of new people to the sport of climbing. Like, there's been this great shuffle. So for a while, maybe people didn't feel comfortable going to a boot camp or boutique fitness type classes. And in New York, there was a period of time where you were able to operate a climbing gym, but not a boutique fitness. And I have great empathy for those that are operating those businesses. Obviously, we're funded by North Castle Partners, and they've got some great portfolio brands like Barry's that were affected there. But one thing that happened is it brought a lot of people into climbing because they wanted to work out and get out of the house. And many, or I believe most of them, fell in love with climbing. So we've exposed more people and brought in more new members since COVID on a per month basis than ever before. We've just smashed records for, new members in a month, and that's been happening 5-6 months of the year. So in one sense, the growth has been enormous. It's a lot of new people coming into the sport. Part of it is through that shuffling. But then what you see is people fall in love, they refer their friends, and similar to, we talked about yoga going from something that was sort of rare or unusual to see to being very common. The barriers are getting lower and lower to entry. We're getting better and better at exposing people to the sport and helping them find and build community. And so it's difficult to see how, once that snowball is rolling, it slows down. It appears to be the type of thing that just keeps rolling faster and faster. it's what it's doing is kicking off benefits of improving people's lives. So it's a really fantastic thing to be a part of and observe.
Yeah, but kind of building on that pandemic era learnings and shufflings, one of the thing in the broader, call it kind of fitness industry, was this: if it wasn't brands pivoting to digital, it was certainly the acceleration of digital. We saw connected equipment and basically anything at home, or even ways to engage with that kind of core exerciser outside the four walls of the studio. A couple times in the conversation, you've alluded to the role that technology plays in kind of the business of rock climbing and indoor climbing. Can you talk a little bit about the impact of technology, what it's like to engage folks both in the gym and then building relationships with them outside the gym, and how you're thinking about continuing to evolve that?
Yeah, absolutely. So during the pandemic, we experimented, like so many organizations, with streaming, and what I had the most fun with was more participatory events. So even things like trivia, or one of the great things about the gym is people come in and they interact with others. So there's, board game nights and many things that aren't even specific to climbing. And people were deprived of that. So we had team members. One was, I think, was doing a session talking about the gossip around their favorite celebrities. And we just kind of let people run wild with it because everybody was stuck in their house. They had nothing else going on and they wanted that connection. So we were doing fitness in the more traditional sense through streaming, and letting people really, because it was uncharted waters for us, really show their own unique personality, and then adding all these other fun, you could think of them as value-added activities. And I think that was fantastic. When we reopen, the focus of our technology focus, and my interest personally, is immersive experiences. So if we were to take a step back, the history of climbing, like many other sports, is people isolating and replicating the thing that they like to do outside. So in our world, the first gyms, people literally bolted or glued actual rocks to like a cinder block wall. There was some of that in the Boston Rock Gym where I learned to climb at the time. Then they got smarter about making holes that were better simulations of the outdoor experience. But really what's been happening is simulating an outdoor climbing wall. But you don't have the grandeur of being outside and the smells. And there's just so much that it's a facsimile, but a lot is lost in translation. Another interpretation of that is to say, well, what can you do even better inside? How could technology make the experience more immersive? I like to think of it as like building a flow machine. How could we put you into flow and help you maintain there? And there's great benefits to onboarding people to climbing and just being able to do things that are gameful, and also progress people through training paradigms. So our focus, and we just launched, you can check out arcadeclimbing.com, is interactive walls that have actually force sensors behind the holds. They're connected to computers and an iPad app, and you can select from it will soon be nearly infinite library of not just climbs, but interactive experiences. So in these, I'm saying this in the unlicensed conceptual sense, but like you could play Pac-Man or Space Invaders where you're dodging things or moving toward things. And you can play with friends, or you could say, no, I want to do a 10-minute guided training session, more akin to, say, what you might find on a connected fitness device like a Peloton, that's going to move you through a whole variety of exercises. We've had people say, oh, I want to do yoga on this, or I want to do power or core. And by looking at the wall, not as a static thing where you put holds up and every person who tries that climb is going to have the exact same experience, there's going to be no feedback and no feedback loops. We look at it like a dynamic experience. So think of taking television where you passively observe to like the first Atari, where now you have a controller and what you see on the screen reacts to your inputs with the controller. And so by saying, okay, we already have the ability through other great work, folks like Kilter, to light up holds, and there's apps that can do that. We thought, oh my God, what if we put feedback on this so the holds know if they're being held, and I can even tell how much you've waited to hold, so I can help improve your technique. I can help identify oftentimes the reason why you were unsuccessful. I can quantify your success, and that allows for a level of dynamic motion and interaction that's very engaging. And the inspiration of that was surfing. I think you've referenced in the podcast in the past, surfing. So when the bathymetry, the bottom of the wave, the bottom of the ocean changes, the wave changes, and you have to be in sync with that. So it can go from steeper or less steep. And a lot of what you're doing is you're reading this thing that's dynamic. Climbing is a little bit different. Outside, you're route finding. It's unclear where even all the holds are, the good feet. But inside, you know exactly where the holds are. They're literally colored. And so you're already missing something from outdoor climbing, which is the discovery component. There's some of it in the problem solving of how to use the holds that exist, but you're missing the part where you're discovering what are even the holds. When you make it interactive and things are changing dynamically, then it helps people to achieve a state of flow because you can have just the right amount of challenge for you in that moment. And I think when we talk about the joy of movement, part of what is so gratifying about so many of these activities is using your body and being in flow and being focused, but not thinking about anything else, not being goal directed in your thinking. And so one thing I think people are missing in society right now is experiences to enter the flow state, as it's often termed. And we can use technology as a mediating function to help people achieve that state. And so when you fundamentally think of an activity like, say, golfing is outdoors. There's a lot of variables involved. The first thing they did when they distill it down is they made a driving range. Well, that's not very exciting. And then there's things like Topgolf and 5-iron that take a much more gameful, interactive, dynamic approach to golfing. And so is it the same as golfing on a golf course? No. But it's also something new and different, not just a distillation of the rote repetitive motion, some of which occurred outside. And I look at Peloton similarly, where biking outside, there's a lot of things going on. You've got the great view and the fresh air, and you're talking with your friends. And then people said, okay, well, we'll just make an exercise bike and put it in a gym. And that's not very exciting. With power meters, you can do more with feedback loops. At least you can see your watts produced. And then Peloton took it to another level and said, no, I can make an entire experience around that and use these biometric mechanisms and readings to adapt the experience. And so there's a whole connected fitness. A lot of it is about feedback loops and that creating greater engagement, not just the production value of the fantastic instructors, but also being able to see what you're doing and even adapt in real time the experience. And so you can think of a number of players, I'm sure you know many off the top of your head, that are doing this oftentimes in the home. And obviously we run brick and mortar facilities. And so we're following in those same footsteps within our existing units. And I'm just tremendously excited about what that means for the sport as we define the new sport of indoor climbing, which is more than just a facsimile attempt at the experience of outdoor climbing.
Yeah, it's almost like you mentioned it, like putting a Topgolf inside the facility, like in this case, putting that arcade climbing right inside the indoor climbing and broader facility with the different fitness and community aspects that go along with it. So I think, yeah, no shortage of opportunities when it comes to how people are experiencing that, but also the exposure they get beyond that. I did see the video too, and it is pretty crazy to look at. You mentioned kind of quantifying all these other aspects of the climb. Is there like a corresponding app? So I would have my own app that does that, or how do I get that feedback from the wall itself?
So you will soon. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve that we're not ready to debut yet, but you can imagine once you can quantify these things, you get a bit of feedback on the iPad app that's linked to the walls today. But there's a lot we can do with that coming out of health tech and what you can do with data science once you have this kind of data. I'm very optimistic that the way people train and progress is going to be completely revolutionized by these sorts of data sets. And it's only so one is obviously resources and the other is accumulating that data and the user feedback. And we're just debuting this now. So I would think of us in the accumulating the data, the objective data about how people are using it, and also the subjective feedback about what is it that people value, would like to know, where are they challenged. One very early and valuable benefit and insight is climbing is not necessarily a symmetrical sport. There's a lot of outdoor climbing where just by the nature of it being on a cliff face, you climb there for a few days and you're almost walking like a crab because everything is tilted like to the left, let's say. And it's no guarantee that when you're climbing inside that you're going to emerge with a fully symmetrical workout, because people tend to favor certain types of motion and then they favor certain types of climbs based on that, even unknowingly. And so our ability to do mirroring, where you do the same thing to the left as to the right, is creating already much more balanced, healthy climbers, and it reduces injury. And so right off the top, that's like an enormous benefit, because nobody wants to be injured doing something they love, and therefore not only deprived of returning to do the thing you love more, but all these, kind of nagging overuse injuries, they reduce quality of life. And so to me, those are like artifacts of a lack of these insight systems. And now that we have the insights, we can pretty quickly start chipping away at that problem set.
Yeah, it'll be awesome to follow along. It definitely jumps to my mind. We've talked about in the context of, it's not going as far down the path to say AR and VR and, the artificial intelligence. So those, to some extent, I'm sure components that'll be involved, but just like this gamifying fitness and exercise and physical activity that fundamentally changes how you engage with it. And I think that's exactly what it is when you talk about, leveraging technology to enhance this indoor climbing experience. So we'll certainly be following along as you debut and evolve with some of the findings that you talk about now in this accumulation phase. As we get towards the end of the conversation, we've talked about quite a bit from the growing sport and kind of the participation that you're seeing, the impact of COVID, certainly technology. When then you take that and turn around and think about what the roadmap for Brooklyn Boulders looks like as we, close out this year and then get into 2022, what are you kind of prioritizing top of mind and talking to the team about? And how does that look like as, hopefully we get into, like I said, 2022 and we're off and running and really putting some of those lingering effects and depths of COVID behind us?
Our principal focus is on the core of what we do, which is we bring people into the sport of climbing, help them build community, and help them progress toward their goals. So I think there's a lot of focus on community. We have a lot of new members, new people exposed to the sport. And the better we get at that, the more infrastructure and process we have to help people make friends and build a sense of community, the better. I think part of that is also a recognition that the sport of climbing can be further diversified in many respects. So we have programs like Climbing for All, which is an access-focused program to ensure that there are not significant financial barriers to people who would like to learn how to climb. We're doing some really fantastic work with organizations. One I'd call out is Embark in Chicago, that has a mentoring program for kids in Chicago school systems and just has tremendous results. So we have programs like that in each of the cities. Those areas we want to continue to invest, because the opportunity to grow climbing, one of the things that's so cool about it is you can build a climbing gym anywhere. And so almost definitionally, it should be broadly accessible to all people. And so that's an area that's really important for us, an area of focus. At the specific gym level, as more people come into the sport with a fitness lens, they're not coming into the gym because they already climb outside and the weather's bad now. Like let's say in Boston, you climb at Rumney, but now it's snowing, so you go inside to climb. Many people are coming in with a fitness lens. And so we see ourselves very much in the world where in a traditional gym, let's say maybe it was 80% fitness, maybe it's like 50% cardio, 30% weights, and then 20% like a pool and a squash court, something like that. We see ourselves going from a previous world where, not for us, but for predecessors, where it was like 98% climbing and maybe there's a few weights in the corner somewhere in a pull-up bar, and they call that the fitness area, to really robust standalone fitness that rivals any fully featured offering. And so one thing that's really exciting for me is in our two newest gyms, a significant portion of the people coming in, and I mean like more than 15%, are coming in with a specific fitness lens, not saying, hey, I'm even here to climb, but just like, you have everything I need to get a great workout. And maybe I will climb at some point, but I'm principally here to, use the treadmill or the VersaClimber or the weights. And so that's a really interesting route for us. And we see that over the time, many of those people do fall in love with climbing. And so it's kind of, in a sense, like this gateway drug to the sport that we believe is so fantastic. And so part of our strategy for being more accessible isn't just barriers to access. It's also meeting people where they are. And if they're principally concerned with getting a great workout and they're not yet converted to the concept that they can get that mostly through climbing, then having these more general fitness amenities and the group fitness is really a great bridge. And so that's very core to our strategy going forward, because like we're saying, like if you believe that this thing, this sport, this activity is beneficial for people, then inherent to that, you believe that the more people who have exposure, the better. And then you follow that one step further, that means that it's incumbent upon us to make the facilities accessible for people who aren't yet all the way there, in determining that like this is something they want to be a central pillar of their life.
Yeah, for sure. I think on so many levels, the pitch and the kind of, if folks aren't already, won over into the world of climbing, the conversation here today probably sparked that interest, and they'll be looking for a climbing gym near them. At least we hope so. So in closing here, tell folks how they can follow along with Brooklyn Boulders, find a facility, just generally check out and keep up with what you have going on.
Yeah, so the website is brooklynboulders.com. We are currently in New York, Chicago, DC, and Boston, with more to come. I'm not ready to announce those, but you'll be seeing us in some other cities as well in not too long. And then the website for the climbing specific technology, the immersive experience, is arcade, just like a video arcade, arcadeclimbing.com. And you can now experience that in our DC location and in our Lincoln Park, Chicago location, and very soon in our Gowanus, New York location. And my expectation is that will be a core part of our gyms going forward, and also in all of our gyms inside of the next year.
Awesome. Super exciting time, both for the sport of climbing, the business of climbing, and certainly Brooklyn Boulders. So I appreciate you, Martin, taking a few minutes here today to talk about it. And yeah, looking forward to sharing this conversation.
Fabulous. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. For more from Fitt Insider, visit insider.fit.co and subscribe to our weekly newsletter for insights and analysis on the business of fitness and wellness. Then go ahead and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. See you next time.